Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pachala. I am Dr. Ajay Solkhe, presently working as Assistant Professor, University School of Management, Kurukshetra University, Kurukshetra, Haryana. In this module, we are going to deliberate upon the evolution of industrial relations in India. Upon completion of the module, the student should be able to understand the scenario of industrial relations in India prior to British rule, during colonial period, and post-independence era, post-globalization period from 1991 to till date. These are some of the periods which we are going to examine that how industrial relation has evolved. Why traditional industrial relations are at the crossroads, the emerging business scenario, and some of the changing dimensions of industrial relations in India. Friends, industrial relations in India prior to British rule. India was predominantly a pastoral and agrarian economy during ancient and medieval times. Trade and business were few and far between. A large number of occupations were carried out by small manufacturers in their cottages, mostly on hereditary basis. Slavery and serfdom were common. The employer-employee relations were those of master and slave, and later on of those of master and servant. Ancient scriptures and laws of our country laid emphasis on the promotion and maintenance of peaceful relations between capital and labor. From very early times, craftsmen and workers felt the necessity of being united. The utility of unions has been stated in Sukla Yajurveda Samhita. If men are united, nothing can deter them. The description of unions of workmen in different occupations is found at many places in the Vedic literature and Shastras. Kautilya's Arthashastra gives a comprehensive picture of the organization and functions of the social and political institutions of India and a good description of unions of employees, craftsmen, or artisans. During the period of Harsha, we hear of Shrenis and Sanghs as well as unions of laborers and employers at Kannauj. During the days of Vikramaditya of Ujjain, there were well organized guilds known as Shrenis or Kulas. These guilds worked according to their own bylaws for the management of the unions. From the earliest Buddhist literature, it appears that Puga and Shreni aimed at making commercial progress. Almost every craft, profession, or occupation had its own union, which was called Shreni. Every Shreni included about 1,000 members. The Shreni elected its chief, who was called Pramukh or Jesht. These guilds and corporations often wielded considerable political power and influence. Rhys Davis mentions 18 unions, while Cambridge History of India speaks only of 4 organized unions. Later on, Majumdar gives a list of 28 unions on the authority of Jatakas and other works as well as inscriptions. Industrial relations during the colonial period. Industrial relation is a byproduct of industrial revolution, and it owes its origin from excessive exploitation of workers by the owners of industries. The relationship was that of two unequals, the powerful employers and powerless workers. It was in fact a master-servant relationship which continued for long. In the early stages, the government adopted the policy of laissez-faire and later on enforced penalty on workers for breaches of contract. Some legislative measures were also adopted for the purpose. Sporadic attempts were made to form trade unions which were resisted and crushed by the employers. The First World War is the first milestone en route to industrial relations in India. It created certain social, economic, and political conditions which raised new hopes among the workers in industries. It was for the first time that workers realized their importance, that unless they produce goods required for war, the wars cannot be fought successfully. Many other events happened which accelerated the pace of industrial relations during the period. The success of Russian Revolution in 1917, establishment of International Labour Organization 1919, and the influence of its conventions and recommendations, constitutional developments in India and formation of central and provincial legislatures in 1919, establishment of All India Trade Union Congress in 1920, the happenings at Carnatic and Birmingham mills, in which Mr. B.P. Wadia was arrested in 1923. Emergence of left wing on the Indian political horizon in 1924. Formation of the Labour Party government in the UK in 1924. Influence of British liberal thought. Pressure by British industrialists of Lancashire and Birmingham. The Indian Trade Union Act of 1926. The Trade Dispute Act 1929. Formation of Royal Commission on Labour 1929 to 31, which made a comprehensive study of Indian labour problem regarding health, safety and welfare of workers and made recommendations of far-reaching consequences. The Second World War gave a new spurt in the field of industrial relations. The exigencies of the war made it essential for the government to maintain uninterrupted flow of goods and services for successful operation of war. Therefore, the Government of India embarked upon a twofold action for maintaining, countering industrial relations. Statutory regulation of industrial relations through the Defence of India rules. Even though the Defence of India rules lapsed after World War II, Rule 81A, which regulated industrial relations during the war, was kept alive for 6 months by an ordinance. Meanwhile, the tripartite deliberations during 1942 to 46 on the Revision of Trade Dispute Act 1929 helped the Indian government in enacting the Industrial Dispute Act 1947, which laid down a comprehensive dispute settlement machinery to be applicable to all the states. The Act retained one of the principal features of the Defence of India rules, viz. Compulsory adjudication of industrial disputes. Bringing all the interests together at a common forum for shaping labour policy, tripartite consultative system was one of the important developments in the sphere of industrial relations in our country. Tripartite consultation epitomizes the faith of India in the ILO's philosophy and objectives. The need for tripartite labour machinery on the pattern of ILO was recommended by the Royal Commission on Labour in 1931. But the first step in this direction was taken only in the year 1942, when the first tripartite labour conference was held at New Delhi under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The conference consisted of two organizations, namely the Indian Labour Conference and the Standing Labour Committee. Industrial relations in post-independence era. Some of the forces were operating at the time of independence. We inherited industrial relations legacies from our colonial masters with colonial mindset, colonial habits and colonial culture. Coincidentally, our freedom struggle coincided with the struggle by the working class for better industrial relations. In course of these struggles, our top leaders made promises and pledges to workers. Therefore, after independence, our leaders had to fulfill those promises and the pledges made to the workers during freedom struggle. Most of our leaders were influenced by Fabian socialist and Marxist communist philosophies, and after independence, they were put to practice. Our industrial relations were deeply influenced by all the above forces. Now, these philosophies got reflected in our Constitution preamble of the Constitution, fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy. This trinity of Indian Constitution is the fountainhead of all factors which shape and guide the spirit of industrial relations. This was further put in practice when we launched our 5-year plans. Each of the successive 5-year plans emphasized for the well-being of the working class, cooperation between worker and employer, harmonious industrial relations, worker rights and workers' participation, welfare states, etc. Social justice and egalitarianism became the guiding spirit. The aftermath of independence saw the mushroom growth of trade unions and a plethora of labor legislations, and this led to the furtherance of litigations and bitter industrial relations not only between the employers and trade unions but between multiple trade unions themselves. This was the period when Industrial Policy Resolution 1956 facilitated the growth of public undertakings both at the center and state level. Through these PSUs, government wanted to present a role model of industrial relations as model employers. In the year 1957, 15th Indian Labour Conference the voluntary schemes for worker participation in management and workers' education schemes, and in the year 1958, 16th Indian Labour Conference, voluntary code of discipline and voluntary codes of conduct were introduced to counteract the unhealthy trends of litigations and delays. In the year 1969, the first National Commission on Labour was formed under the chairmanship of Justice Gajendra Gadkar, which made significant recommendations, but most of them could not be implemented. This was also the period when nationalization of industry was at its peak. Many banks, six textile mills, six steel plants, and collieries, etc., were nationalized. In banks, workers' directors were put on the board of directors as per the Bank Nationalization Act. In the post-independence period, especially the later portion of 70s and 80s, the Indian judiciary displayed unprecedented judicial activism by giving pro-labor judgments, which had tremendous impact on industrial relations. This was the period when amendments in Industrial Dispute Act led to the inclusion of Section 2A, 9A, 11A, 17B, Chapter 5B. Contract Labour Regulation and Abolition Act 1972 was passed, and Section 10 of the Act was interpreted to absorb the workers if they have worked for substantial years on permanent and perennial nature of job. This provided excessive protection to labour. The results was that we had a pampered labour class and a stagnant, regulated, controlled industrial relations in the late 80s. Industrial relations in post-globalization period from 1991 to till date. The requirements and imperatives of global competitiveness are international standards in quantity, quality, cost effectiveness, and customers' concern. This in turn requires introduction of state-of-the-art technology followed by innovation, creativity, and strategic alignment of divergent resources to create performing climate. Such a performing climate requires a dynamic and synergetic employee relationship. The traditional industrial relation was made to fight the fire or douse the fire. It was reactive, negative, passive, ad hoc, and legalistic. It was selfish by being confined to its own members without having any concern for business organizations or society at large. It was inflexible, rigid, and ideologies bound which have lost their relevance. The result is that the tradition of industrial relation is under tremendous pressure because it was made to cater to the requirements of controlled, protected, and regulated market, and it is usable to address to the imperatives of competitive global market. A tug of war is going on between forces of action and forces of inertia. The market requires a flexible, resilient, and aggressive employees relations, and traditional industrial relations want to stick to status quo and no change. Traditional institutions of industrial relation are losing their importance and relevance. Trade unions are marginalized and kept outside the mainstream of business. Strike is losing its cutting edge. Collective bargaining is being replaced by individual bargaining. Ideological decisions are being replaced by business pragmatism. Emerging business scenario. In the post-industrial society, technological revolution has created a situation where space, distance, and time have lost their relevance. National boundaries have completely withered away. The world has really become a global village. This has facilitated the movement of business across the borders. Therefore, global entrepreneurs, better known as multinational corporations and transnational corporations, have come up with multi-locational and multicultural characteristics. The business skyline is completely changing by continuous mergers and acquisitions across the globe. Global competitiveness is the only rule of the global business game where only the fittest can survive. We also saw the growth of joint venture of Indian and foreign collaborators in banking, insurance, IT, telecom, BPOs, automobiles, hotels and entertainments, fast food and drinks, tours and travels, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, etc. The giant multinationals have started showing interest in the big Indian market. The cheap Chinese goods have also made inroads. The traditional industries are facing acute competition and have also started thinking to become smart by shedding their extra baggage by resorting to restructuring and reengineering. This has been necessitated also by day-to-day technological innovations and their application in industry. The exercise amounts to generating surplus and its management. This has created real HR crisis for the sunset industries. Changing dimensions of industrial relations in India. Emerging business scenario has brought in new market imperatives. The traditional industrial relations system is under unprecedented pressure because it is not geared to meet this. A market determined profile of industrial relation is required to meet the challenges of the market. Therefore, traditional industrial relation is giving way to emerging employee relations. Some of the features of this phenomenon are given below. The institution of trade union is getting weak. Employers are going for unitarism and non-unionism. In information technology and information technology enabled services, there are hardly any trade unions. The institution of collective bargaining is being decentralized and being replaced by unit bargaining, individual bargaining and commercial bargaining. Disinvestment, privatization and voluntary retirement scheme are almost accepted facts of industrial relations. Changing pattern of compensation, reward management, fixed and assured time rate wages are replaced by variable performance based wages. Well paying, secure, low productive jobs in organized sector are replaced by low paying, more insecure productive jobs in unorganized, self-employed sectors. Pro-labor stance of the government is getting reduced. The attitude of the judiciary is also changing. There is a proposal for labor law simplification codification. There is a trend to make employer-friendly conciliation. There has been ease in labor inspection. There has been use of Section 10, subsection 3 of the Industrial Dispute Act declaring strikes illegal. Strict enforcement of the unfair labor practices, use of police for diluting labor struggle, re-engineering and rationalization of work, job mobility, redeployment, job rotation, shedding surplus manpower, competencies management and skill formation, multi-skilling and career development, employee involvement, participation and communication, trade union participation, enterprise-based unions, responsive trade unionism, diluting political ideology. All these activities have become regular features and are increasingly impinging on the emerging industries. This trend is going to be accelerated in future. Friends, I hope you have understood the current scenario of the industrial relations. You can also refer to other quadrants of this module for testing your knowledge and having some more input on the theme of the module. Happy learning.